Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we are changing the mental health narrative, bringing hope and solutions. Here's your host, Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist.
Mary Hoggatt with True Adventure Counseling has been working in the field of mental health for the last decade. She is passionate about helping people to face the false identities they've lived under and to step forward into the freedom of who they truly are. She has worked extensively in the areas of trauma, abuse, codependency, childhood experiences, and broken relationships. As a therapist, she is committed to walking with individuals and couples to rewrite messages of abandonment, shame, guilt, anxiety, and abuse into messages of hope, purpose, health, confidence, and joy. You can find out more about Mary Hoggatt at trueadventurecounseling.com, trueadventurecounseling.com, or contact her at mary.hoggatt, Hoggatt, at trueadventurecounseling.com. Well, Mary, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's such a joy to be with you.
I'm hoping you could start us off by letting us know how you got into the work you're doing and what drives your passion for it.
Well, it's interesting. I never saw myself as being a therapist, but I had walked with a friend who was losing her partner. They'd only been married for about 5 years. I was walking with her and her 2 young children as he was dying of colon cancer. And there was something that was so beautiful and vulnerable and unique about walking with her over the last 18 months of his life. And I found myself really coming alive and being able to be present with her, to be a place where she could process and talk through things. And after going through that, I really wanted to figure out, like, what was that? What was that for me? And from that, I really dove into, I think it's therapy. I think I want to be a therapist. Yet I had some hindrances to that because, as most people, I have walked through some really hard things. And in my opinion, a therapist has it all together and has this perfect life and knows all the things. But as I was really sitting with it, it was like, no, therapists know what it is to walk through pain. And so I dove in and I loved every minute of it. Every client that I go to work with, there's a new story, there's a new experience, there's a new piece that they open up, and that's my favorite. So I've been doing this and for the last few years, and it's been extraordinary.
And you talk in your literature about helping people with identity.
Yes.
What does that mean to you? How does that person form an identity or reform?
And that's often the work we're doing, is reforming, because so often we adopt identities that either somebody gave us or we assumed was our identity based on the things that we've walked through, whether it's broken childhood, whether it's abuse, whether it's people pleaser, whatever those pieces are. We often form identities and vows and ideas about who we are that are not actually truly connected to who we actually are. And so we walk through life and wonder why things don't fit right, why I don't feel alive, why things aren't connecting with me, why trauma just keeps coming, like I keep finding it over and over again, why I keep having these broken relationships over and over again, feeling unfulfilled. And so that is often because we are not actually walking in the truth of our identity, who we really are. And so I love walking with people to say, hey, where did we pick up the pieces of your identity? And if we go back and we heal those pieces, who does that make you actually, who you really are? And so rewriting identity is so exciting. It's so exciting. And watching people step back into life in a brand new way, see themselves in a new way, relate to other people in a new way, whether it's with their partner or their children or in their career or even just with themselves. It's really fun.
And so do you have a specific process for helping people either identify and or rewrite whatever it is as they're holding inside of themselves as an identity?
Yes. So some of my favorite pieces are to look at trauma. I think all of us have trauma in one way or the other, big T, little t traumas. So looking at those traumas and what the messages were that we hung on to from those traumas. Looking, CBT I think is great, but one of my favorite in the last few years has been internal family systems, or IFS, where we actually go back to those parts. And they could be trauma places, they could be joy places, they could just be like just these little pieces that we started hanging on to a message. So going back to those parts and bringing the healing or unburdening those parts, and then letting them those parts actually come forward in a more present way, in the joy and the identity pieces of who we are meant to be. It's really fascinating to watch this happen with couples and with individuals, any age. It's really a transformative process.
And of course, we should clarify a little bit what you mean when you talk about a part, because some people might have, of a certain age, might have seen television movies about Sybil and other multiple personality disorders. And so some people are a little skittish about talking about parts.
Yes.
But that's not what you're referring to.
That's not what I'm referring to. So let's say you and I were having a conversation and I was challenging you to, you're wanting to work out more, you're wanting to go to the gym more. And you're like, well, there's part of me that really wants to go, but there's this other part of me that I really just want to stay in bed. Like that right there, that conversation, which all of us have had, like, I really want to do this, but part of me just really doesn't. Or part of me is like really scared. Those are the parts that we're talking about. We often it's based in story, like your story, it's based in your experiences, it's based in the different messages that we hang on to. These parts are formed. We're not talking multiple personalities. These parts of you and the ideas, the experiences you have are formed, and they carry with you all the time. So you and I having a conversation right now, maybe I remind you of, a niece, so there's part of you like, oh, well, that's, it's my niece. There are things that kick in that can be triggers or experience memories, thoughts that kind of kick in that are part of what your experience is right now. So those parts are where we go back to and we figure out what's going on with those parts.
Yes, and or other words people have used to try and describe this are perspectives, motivations, positions that I hold, aspects of my personality. So it's interesting because in the internal family systems work, there is a structure of theory about it, which is just a way to try and describe what we actually observe happens with people. And one of the core observations in that is that there aren't any bad parts. These parts are aspects of my personality and or strengths and creativity within me that got stirred up to try and handle a difficult situation at some previous time in my life. And depending upon the intensity of the situation and my coping skills at the time, I may or may not have felt like I could handle this or I was going to survive it.
Right. Yes.
And so when you work with people and you're trying to, how do you pull in the parts work to the identity work?
So it's really interesting because as you're saying, like some people can go with the parts conversation. Some people like that just feels a little bit too outside the box. And so often I'll say, well, talk to me about what the perspective is here. Talk to me about what you're thinking, what the messages are. So knowing that, we often we bring in with identity work, like, okay, so when we're talking about this, where do you feel it? Like, what is the emotion that's going on? And sometimes they're like, I don't know, like I feel just tense in my shoulders. Okay, that makes sense. So let's kind of follow that. Like, where does that tenseness come from? Where, what is the thought that's going through your head? Well, that this is expected of me. Okay, interesting. Where did that expectation come from? Well, my dad always needed me to like be the best at everything. Okay, so you had this perspective part where you have high expectations because somebody told you you're the best at everything. So now you have to hang on to that. So that can be a way that we look at the identity piece. But what if that's not true of you? What if you don't have to be the best at everything? What if you can just be? What if it's just be? What does that look like to just be? And you see their shoulders start to come down like, well, I guess I could be not the best at writing, but I am a really good mom, or I'm a really good, whatever those pieces are. So they start like finding new pieces maybe to their identity, and they don't have to prioritize or put on a pedestal this one area and keep striving for that. And we bring more balance to who they really are.
Well, and I don't know if you use it or not, but one of the best ways that I learned years ago to help people into that is a thing called body journaling or holographic memory reprocessing, where after I help them identify, oh, they feel kind of tight in their shoulders, then you have the person get very clear in their description of it. Hot, cold, large, small, movement, smooth, sharp, texture, whatever. And then once they get that sensation specified in these descriptors, whether there's a color or a temperature to it or whatever, then you have them talk directly to that part and ask it, when is the first time you got put into my body? And that's how you might arrive at, and this thing bubbles up about, oh, this was the time my dad was screaming at me because I was less than perfect on the soccer field or whatever.
Right.
And so it's following the physical sensations, what a lot of people now in the past 20 years or so are calling somatic therapy and somatic informed and trauma informed therapy. It's reconnecting people's conscious awareness to their physical energy system and using it as good information, as opposed to what we do most in the Western world, which is condition people to numb it out and distract from it and dissociate from it.
Absolutely. It's so interesting that you bring this up. Just this last week, I've had several clients that they say they stay very, very cognitive. So we have lots of conversations about thoughts, lots of conversations about perspective. But when I try to have them come further down into their body, they're like, there's such a block. There's such a block. And we've gone back to, well, feelings weren't really safe. So I don't know what that feels like. And so we're finding ways to actually get them to connect more into their body. And it's really interesting because whenever we do that, they immediately go to like, I don't know why I'm thinking about it. When I was 12 years old, blah, 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 blah happened. It's like, because your body, I mean, I'm sure you've read Body Keeps a Score, but our body remembers our emotion. Cognitively, we work really hard to ignore, to put aside, to suppress, to numb, to addict. Like we find ways to cognitively push off, but our body doesn't forget.
Decades and decades before The Body Keeps the Score was written by Bessel van der Kolk, Babette Rothschild wrote the book, The Body Remembers. And so it's this book that was inviting us as therapists to pay more attention to the physiological interplay and the tiny little facial changes and flushing of skin color and breath patterns that would indicate that someone's moving out of parasympathetic into a sympathetic response, right? Out of a relaxed rest and digest response into a stress or fight or flight response, right there in front of you in the therapy. Whereas if you're looking at them as an intellectual entity sitting in your office, you don't notice any of those things. And you lose all that information. Yeah.
Yes, it's the holistic process, like seeing the person in front of you as a holistic being. And I'm not kidding. Like I've seen clients that when we start going to a part, their physicality becomes almost childlike. They start, so in couples work, this is always really fascinating when there's a part that one of the individuals kind of takes on that goes back to their childhood. You can see them become almost childlike in their physicality, and helping them draw attention, like, okay, what's going on? Like, where are the thoughts? Are like, and they immediately go to a 12-year-old part or whatever that is. And so it's paying attention to that. But then also what's so cool is when you watch a part get healed, unburdened, you watch them like step back and like they step into themselves again. It can be so, not every time is it immediate. Sometimes it takes a while to get there, but I've seen like an immediate shift physicality in how they respond.
Yeah, there can be many repetitions of trying to open a conversation with a particular perspective or part
Right.
before there's a breakthrough. And yet the breakthroughs are really evident when they happen.
So
And
evident.
and the critical piece there is, can I be patient? Can I be
Mhm.
gentle with myself as I'm looking at establishing that rapport, that connection or communication, so that whatever is needed by that younger part or that perspective of myself that's so afraid of survival or of functioning properly, whatever's needed can be supplied by my core self, and
Yes.
then that breakthrough can happen.
Absolutely. I have one client, and we found like a 3-year-old perspective, 3-year-old part that she, as even her, like where she was then. And so she, the part was there on the floor playing. And she's like, I don't like it. I don't want to get on the floor and play with that. And so there is an inacceptance that she has of herself that's very much getting in the way. So we're working, and we're 3 or 4 weeks into this. She's working on like, what is it that's in the way for me? Even, I mean, she's like, it's like 3-year-old me. Why would I not? But there's such a block there. And so we're paying attention to what's going on so that she can find the freedom and acceptance and eventually like love herself enough to actually take care of herself. But we run into these blocks, and so we have to find what is getting in the way. It's so fascinating.
So as I identify that I might have parts of myself that are feeding an identity that
Mhm.
is blocking me,
Mhm.
what do I do? How do I come in a process with a therapist like you? How do I make a shift that would actually help me rewrite my identity?
Sure. So this is where it gets, for me, really, really fun. I always say fun, and clients are like, this is not fun. I'm like, I know it's not fun, but this is the journey. This is the adventure of finding out who you are. So I'll give you an example. So I'm working with a sweet young mom. She's a brand new mom, and her postpartum depression is really significant. And she has deep, deep sadness. And so she's scared of her sadness. She wants somebody else to hold it. She wants her partner to hold it. Like, this is too much. I need you to hold my sadness. Okay, now I can breathe. But what is happening there is there's something that she developed early in her life where there wasn't a lot of room for emotion. She was the smart one. She was the nice one. She was the pretty one. And so this is the identity. There is no room for sadness. But as a little girl, there was a point where I think she lost a pet. She was so sad, but she didn't feel that it was okay for her to have her sadness with her family. So this perspective, this part, this experience, she tried to push aside very, very quickly and move on. So now that this sadness is coming up as a new mom, she doesn't know where to go. So we've walked toward this sad part, and she has such compassion for the sad part. She's still scared of the emotion of this part, but she's walking towards it, and she's finding that she can get closer and closer. So that sad part has to be invited out. That sad part has to say, I can make room for your sadness, and it's going to be okay. So she's finding what's guarding her from going towards that sadness and letting herself hold it. Then there's also the inviting the sadness to come out so that she can actually experience it. And what's really cool, and this is where she went cognitive again, she goes, I know that sadness brings me something. I know that there's some sort of gift here. I just don't know what it's going to be. And she's a little bit of a type A. I don't know what it's going to be. So the unknown is hard for me. So that's another perspective, that it doesn't all have to be controlled. So there's a couple perspectives or parts that we're working with here that we need to like get through to get to this place where she can actually allow her sadness to be something that could be a gift and isn't so scary.
And when you were saying in that she says the unknown is difficult for me,
Wow.
that's a wonderful thing to explore. Why is that?
Why is that?
Right? Because the only way that can be is if I've got an association in my mind that says the unknown is bad, or I start projecting into the unknown negativity. On the other hand, if I start to project into the unknown, oh my gosh, they may be giving me a gift, or there might be $1 million on the other side of that door. I can't wait to go explore the unknown.
Right, exactly.
So for somebody who carries within them a statement like the one you made, this person made the statement, the unknown is difficult for me. Right there, if you're listening well, you know, oh, this person has a connection in their mind between negativity and the unknown.
Exactly, exactly. And there she has an experience in her early college years where there was an unknown that she didn't feel prepared for. So she made some sort of vow around that time, like, I won't do unknown. I will always know as much as I can. I will know, and I will stay in control.
Yeah, I can tell a story on my dad, bless his heart, rest his soul. He hated surprises, and he let everybody know it. Don't surprise me. I hate surprises. The origin of that was that as a young man in beginning of college, his mother had planned a surprise party for him with all of her friends, and his dad died when he was 6, so he was basically the man of the house from 6 on. He had come home with some friends from college, and they had been starting partying, and they had planned for party. He had no idea that she had this party there. My dad was a very sensitive, loving person. He would never have wanted to hurt his mother's feelings, and yet now he's between a rock and a hard place. She felt devastated. He felt angry and responsible for devastating her. And that was an origin for him of no surprises. Doesn't matter what it is.
Right. It's not worth it. It puts
the risk is way too high.
Yes, the risk is so high. And so often it's when there's a risk or a pain or a fear that we experience that we don't feel that we have capacity for, that usually one of those parts or perspectives gets stuck. We have some sort of message, we have some sort of like vow, some sort of perspective of ourselves or the perspective of the world that like locks in. And that's where we get stuck in identities that don't belong to us. That's where we get stuck in identities that actually hinder us rather than allow us.
Well, and yes, absolutely. And a part of us getting stuck is that we're just going to work it at the intellectual, rational level, and we're not going to let ourselves go into an experiential level.
Right.
So even though he knew what this origin was, it never got worked on or resolved because he wasn't willing to go back and feel what was going on in him, feel what he downloaded in that interaction with his mother and that surprise party that was so devastating. And why would he never do that? Probably because it was tied to the grief of losing his father at 6 years old, etc. So if I'm not willing to turn and face the things that the fearful parts of my mind are telling me are too much for me, I stay right where I am in terms of that level of functioning on that issue. I don't make progress unless I'm willing to face it.
Well, and so this is so interesting. So one of my favorite clientele to work with is couples, because so often couples come to each other with those needs that were not met or getting stuck in those perspectives, hoping that my partner is going to fix this.
Yep. Or protect me from it. Right.
Exactly. The way Richard Schwartz talks about it is this person is going to be my redeemer. This person is going to redeem these places for me because I'm going to be able to rework these areas and they're going to make it all better. So I'm going to feel chosen. I'm going to feel loved. I'm going to feel that I'm enough. I'm going to feel validated. I'm going to feel valued. I'm going to feel like I have worth. This person outside of me is going to give me all of this. But you know what? It never works. It never works because it's external. It is
Yeah.
something outside of
Yeah.
you. It's something outside of your identity.
And the stuck point and or the trauma is inside me.
Exactly. So we have to face what's inside of us in order to actually heal that. And what's really beautiful, and Schwartz talks about this a lot, when we're able to that's healed inside of you, then your person gets to be the person that you live freely with. And you have what's called courageous love. He calls it courageous love. I love how he said that. But this is so his amazing book, which by the way you recommended, You Are the One You've Been Waiting For. It incorporates IFS, internal family systems, and couple and like the couples therapy, like what happens between a couple. But he said this generally, what our partner provokes in you is what you need to heal. I thought that was so perfect. I think that is so true. So whatever is provoked between you and your partner, usually there are parts of you, perspectives of you that get so enraged or so hurt or re-traumatized by what's going on in your relationship with your partner, not because they're intentionally doing this, however there is that too, but because your part needs to be healed and was hoping that this redeemer person would fix it, and they're not. So then you feel even doubly hurt by it. So
Yeah,
fascinating.
it is. I really like that. And I think when I recommended that book to you, I said that for a lot of years, I would catch flack from people, whether it's in a group setting or in a couples therapy setting, if I would see an emotional upset or triggering in somebody, and I'd focus on them to help them find a way to release that, or at least identify it for future work. And people would say, well, you're not doing couples work, or you're not doing group work, or you're not doing family systems work.
Mm.
And this book, this application of internal family systems to intimate relationships is that validation that this is a very solid way to work with people within the
Mhm.
couple's dynamic or within a family dynamic even, because I'm looking at an actual internal causal mechanism, and I'm providing the relief for the person by helping them understand how is it that they are creating the emotion they're experiencing in the moment.
Yes.
What are they making this interaction between themselves and their partner mean? Because they're the one giving it the meaning.
Yes.
And what's so often really exciting and hopeful is when we help people communicate about what it means to each of them, they see, oh, that's very different meaning over here from over here.
Right. Those different experiences. And so often the experience that I'm living out in the moment because my partner's doing this is not actually the experience of the moment. It's some past experience or a whole mountain of experience that just this, I'm playing it out again because I'm living in that place. I'm living in that part. And so my partner is also responding in his whole mountain of experience. And so why are we not communicating? Why are we not connecting? Why is this the same argument we've had for 30 years? Because these parts have not been healed. I keep going to him that he's going to make it all better. He keeps coming to me, hoping that I'm going to make that part all better for him. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so
This reminds me of this phrase that Brene Brown talks about, that she says has saved her marriage on a number of occasions.
mm-hmm.
In acknowledgement of what you and I are talking about right now, that I'm the one that creates my upset in here with whatever interpretation I'm choosing and placing on this interaction between me and you and the world around me.
The story I'm telling myself.
That's it.
Yeah.
When I get triggered, she says, okay, the story I'm telling myself now is, and then here's the story.
Yes.
And, the classic example is that he comes home and says, did you have something planned for dinner? And she goes into a spin about how just because I'm the woman and I have to do all the domestic stuff and why, you think, and she was getting all ramped up. She caught herself and said, okay, the story I'm telling myself now is that you think just because I'm the woman, I have to do all this. And she went on for a bit with all of the permutations and negativity that was spilling out. And he said, okay, well, thanks for letting me know that. The reason I asked is because on the way home, I stopped and got fixings for lasagna. And if you were going to have something else, I'll make this tomorrow. Otherwise, I'll make lasagna for dinner tonight. And the whole thing just diffuses.
Yeah.
And if we practice understanding that every time we have a negative, this is the opposite of what our culture teaches us, by the way. My
Right.
culture teaches me that when I have a negative emotion in here, it means I need to scan the environment for who I have to attack or run away from or bribe or seduce. So
Yes.
I get them to change so I don't have to feel this. This is the
Exactly.
opposite of that. I realize I don't like what's going on in here. I take a breath and turn the focus inside and ask myself, what am I making this situation mean? How am I creating this negative emotion?
Right.
And if I'm working with a therapist like you, I learn some tools for dismantling that
Yes.
pattern of thought and emotion and physical tension. And I'm free to move through the situation more lovingly and respectfully.
Exactly. Well, and to go back to what you're saying, like the culture has communicated, or what we're
Conditioned us, right?
conditioned us. So no wonder we're tired, because we're constantly changing our environment. No wonder we're feeling anxious, because any of those things can throw me off. No wonder we're feeling attacked over and over and over again, but we don't know exactly what the attack is, because it's all outside of us. So if we can
Because we're projecting that it's outside of us, right?
exactly, because we're exactly. So if we can come in here and go inside and say, okay, what story am I telling myself, and why? Why am I telling myself this story? We can rewrite the story. We can rewrite the chapters from here out. We can rewrite what a relationship looks like. We can rewrite what the world looks like. We can rewrite how we engage with it. We can rewrite how we live with our story and actually take care of it. It is so beautiful when we're actually able to do that, because we become more powerful. There is a whole, I love how Schwartz talks about courageous love. There is a whole depth to love that I think many of us have not experienced, because we're needing it to be a certain thing and we're white knuckling trying to force it. But that isn't love. There's an experience of love that we get to have.
And it's inside you.
It's
And
inside.
once you tap into it and get experience of it, and then you start sharing that with others, your partner and others, it just amplifies. It's the reverse of a zero-sum game. The more you give, the more you have of it, and the
Yeah.
more you experience it as you're giving it.
Yeah.
There's this book. I'm interviewing somebody tomorrow. His name is Stephen Jacobs. And there's a line in it that I've quoted a few times on my other internet show recently, because it's so close to what we have observed, what you and I are talking about now. I have a bottom line observation that says, and I hand out 10 of these, they're printed up and I give them to people in a first or second session. And one of them says, what happens to me and around me in my life is nowhere near as important as how I choose to interpret and respond to those events.
That's so
Here, Stephen Jacobs says, the real power in any situation is always our interpretation of that situation. The real power lies in how I'm interpreting it. And if
yes.
the kind of work that you're talking about doing with people and the IFS work and the trauma work is uncovering, if the roots of the interpretation I'm placing on this event today are from a trauma I had at age 12, that would be important for me to know.
Yes.
Because I'm sitting here
Exactly.
thinking I'm relating to you as a competent adult relating to another competent adult. And yet, if the interpretation I'm placing on your head nods or, the last thing you said is coming from a 12-year-old that got interrupted brutally and verbally abused by some teacher,
Yes.
then I'm not going to make this interaction mean a respectful communication between two professionals on an interview. I'm going to get all triggered.
Absolutely. I love, one of my clients came up with this analogy and I absolutely loved it. So he was recognizing a 7-year-old part, a 7-year-old part who was untrustworthy of women in particular, because he was abused by women at that age. So with his wife and with his daughter, his 7-year-old part can sometimes get triggered. And he goes, when the 7-year-old is driving the car, it gets really messy. And so I need to be able, he said, when I'm able to like put the 7-year-old, like, hey, how about I drive? You go ahead and sit in the back. I'm going to take care of it. These women are safe, and I will make sure that you're safe. So you can go ahead and sit back there, and I'm going to drive the car. So that goes exactly with what you're saying. Like, we don't recognize, because we're in like fight or flight, or like a necessary an urgent way of responding. Sometimes we don't recognize that I'm responding like a 7-year-old. My
Right.
7-year-old is driving the car.
And one of the fundamental pieces that I know you understand and you're getting from reading Dr. Schwartz's book is that in order to get movement in that, I can't just be thinking about it. I have to have a visualized, experiential conversation between the adult Tim and the 7-year-old Tim.
Yes.
I
Yes.
have to find out, literally with that childlike curiosity, what is it my 7-year-old perspective or part or aspect or motivations
Yeah.
need me to be aware of and need to be done in this interaction so that it feels heard and
Yes.
understood.
Exactly. One of the ways Schwartz talks about it specifically with couple therapy is don't talk from your parts, talk for your parts. Just say, you know what? Sometimes when we interact like this, like it brings up this part of me, and I realize I'm responding like this, and I don't want to do that. But this part does need to know, like, my voice matters to you. My voice really matters to you. And in the partnerships, the partner could be like, you're right. Your voice does matter to me. And I would want your part to know that you can talk about that. Like, there's room for you to talk about that. And so it's fascinating to be able to speak for your parts, not from your parts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm looking at the clock and I'm realizing that if I stretch it, we've got another 8 to 10 minutes before I have a hard stop. So I
Okay.
wonder if you could get centered, take a breath, and think about what we've talked about so far, whether it was in the pre-interview talk or now, that you might want to go back and highlight, or something we haven't even mentioned about you and your practice and what you offer and
Sure.
how you work with people that you want to get in before we have to wrap up.
Absolutely. Well, this has been such a fun conversation because I feel like I've gotten to talk about all of my favorites. I love talking about identity work. Again, I think so many people, it breaks my heart. So many people are not living in the identity of who they really are. And we're living out of these broken parts. So identity work is so key. IFS is a wonderful way of going to those places of broken identity and healing it. In fact, one of the things that I often talk about with my clients, once there's a part that's healed. So let's say, we worked on your 12-year-old part, and you're like, oh my goodness, like that part is unburdened. Like, I don't have to hang on to that message anymore. I don't have to like live from that broken place anymore. I will often say, okay, now go do something that your 12-year-old part would love to do. Go for a bike ride, or go get ice cream, because then we get access back to these live, living, beautiful, joyful, creative vitality that we're always meant to be there. That's coming back to the identity of who you are. So that's always fascinating. And then I love doing couples work. I really do. It's interesting because I'm a marriage and family therapist, but I loved family systems so much that I didn't think that I necessarily want to do couples, because that gets messy and there's conflict. I'm actually finding that is one of my greatest joys, is to work with couples, because it's two individuals, and a couple is only as healthy as the least healthy person. And so when we're able to go back and say, okay, Sue, how do we work with what's going on with you? What are the parts that are coming up here? Sam, what's coming up with you? And like really finding the healing in those parts, they can step into a different kind of love, a different kind of relationship. I'll often say, we're going to go into relationship 2.0. This is the new you, the new relationship, the new way of communicating and seeing each other. It's not about getting rid of conflict. It's how to have healthier conflict and recognize what's actually coming up for you. So I love all of those pieces. It's so much fun. And like I said, every client that I get to work with, I always say, this is my favorite, because I get experience and learn along with you. I don't know it all, but we get to find our way there. We get to journey towards whatever that truth of who you are is. and it's so much fun. In fact, I'm about to launch my website, and the name of my counseling agency is True Adventure Counseling, because I think it's an adventure, and it's an adventure to find the truth of you. So that's me.
Excellent. And so if people want to find that when that website is launched, what's your URL going to be?
Say that again.
What is the website going to be?
Sure. Yep. It's just trueadventurecounseling.com.
Excellent.
And I'm Mary Hoggatt, and it's just me right now, and I love it. Eventually, I hope to have more to join me, but it's my greatest honor to walk with people as they walk towards health and their true wholeness.
Well, I appreciate you taking time to share with us, and I will send you a couple of other book titles. We want to try and squeeze that in here that might interest you, and I look forward to hearing about the success of your practice and its launch. And I'm assuming that the way most of us have done these days, that you're doing more virtually, so people don't have to be in your hometown to get access to you.
Exactly. I'm doing actually all of it virtually, which I think is really fun because I get to be here at home. My family's here, but really it's clients get to be where they feel safest, and we just get to dive in together. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for taking time to be with us. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It was an honor to be with you. Take care.
All right. Mary Hoggatt with True Adventure Counseling has been working in the field of mental health for the last decade. She is passionate about helping people to face the false identities they've lived under and to step forward into the freedom of who they truly are. She has worked extensively in the areas of trauma, abuse, codependency, childhood experiences, and broken relationships. As a therapist, she is committed to walking with individuals and couples to rewrite messages of abandonment, shame, guilt, anxiety, and abuse into messages of hope, purpose, health, confidence, and joy. You can find out more about Mary Hoggatt at trueadventurecounseling.com, trueadventurecounseling.com, or contact her at mary.hoggatt, Hoggatt, at trueadventurecounseling.com.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.